This is Dolora Zajick, and I'm here teaching students at the Liceu and also students that were involved with the Vinyas competition and the conservatory here in Barcelona. Wonderful, because I have so many fond memories of Barcelona and the theater, as I sang many performances here. Some friends of mine and I decided to found an organization for singers with large voices because they're often lost through the system in their development. Some people don't understand their development. Other people don't have the patience to deal with the fact that they take longer to train. It comes together later for a lot of dramatic voices, and sometimes the bridges that exist for other singers don't exist for singers with larger voices. And so our job is to keep those bridges in place where they don't exist. And sometimes those bridges change. So where there was lack of opportunity, all of a sudden there's opportunity, and then there's another thing that's missing for them. And so our job is to fill in the gaps, what's missing in the business and what's missing in organizations to help develop these dramatic voices, which are very much in demand. It's very difficult to cast Verdi and Wagner if you don't have the right voices. A lot of people have this misconception that there's just a few places for singers and there's thousands of wonderful singers willing to fill in those spots. And actually the opposite is true. When a company is trying to put together an A-level cast, it's hard to find all the right singers in the same place. But there is an unspoken group of people that are at the very top, and it's there by role. It's who can do this role better than anybody, and if you can't get that person, who's the next best person? And that's how opera companies look at it. So they don't look at who's versatile and who's this. They say, who can do this role the best? And that's how you get on that group, in that group of people. And that can be anywhere from 75 to 150 people, thereabouts, and no more than that. And so the problem is there's hardly anybody that can do it. So it's a matter of getting those right voices and training. There's more voices than there ever have been on the planet. So why are there fewer dramatic voices? And so our job is to address that. We also work with spinto-sized voices, and some voices grow with age. So we take that into consideration as well. No, there weren't. But I just happened to be with a voice teacher that knew what he was doing. And he had an opera company, and I got to sing in the opera company at a very early age. So I was able to get experience at the same time that I was learning how to sing. So I was very fortunate. But many of my dramatic colleagues didn't make it because they didn't have those opportunities. I had more problems when I reached in my late 20s. There were problems there because I was hitting that wall where I didn't have what they were looking for. They needed more polish, but for my size of voice, it just took longer. I didn't get into a major training program until I was 31, but then all of a sudden it happened very quickly for me. So I went into Maryla, and I was what they were looking for. They were looking for, Verdi singers, especially Verdi baritones and mezzos. And I fit that bill. And when I finished my training, or when I was almost finished with my training, they gave me a contract to sing Trovatore, and the rest was history. Because once I performed Trovatore in San Francisco, then I had work all over the place. Then it was just a matter of, saying, which roles to pick. I did have 6 auditions right after I got out of my Adler Fellowship, but they were the last auditions I ever did. So, it was very, in terms of getting work, it was very easy. At the time, they understood what a Verdi voice was. They gave me the room to grow. They understood that, dramatic voices evolve later. So I was 34 when I left the program. It was a perfect age because, all of a sudden I had contracts at the Met, and Chicago Lyric, and La Scala, and, it happened quite quickly because I went in at the right age. So there was a period of time when they were cutting off the age limit to 30. And they realized it was a mistake, and many opera companies realized it was a mistake because they weren't getting dramatic voices anymore because they were cutting them off at the knees. Now, there are some programs like the Met that take them very young. And when they do that, the system works a little differently at the Met, because what they do is they give them 3 years of heavy training, and then they give them roles of increasing importance at the Met if they come up to snuff. Because the younger you start, the less sure their success. You don't know if they're going to make it or not. So when you start with them very young, they get, as they become more and more experienced, they'll give them small roles. And then by the time, 6 or 7 years roll around, then they give them a major role. But they've started them so much younger that, so the Met, it works a little differently at the Met than it does in other places, but it still works. So those are the things that you need to be aware of. And, but also it leaves room for dramatic voices, because in other words, they got time to develop. So, well, it was very complicated, because I wanted to play piano desperately from the age of 7. I really wanted to play the piano, and circumstances didn't allow it to happen. I couldn't get near a piano. So by the time I was in high school, it was far too late to become a pianist. So I thought I would just do it as a hobby, and I would go into medicine. Oh, well, I'll be a doctor, and then I'll just do it for fun. And then I took voice lessons at the University of Nevada, intending to become a doctor. And it turned out that I had a voice, and they said that, even though I did not have a music education, that I was, gifted musically. And, I could already do polyrhythms and things like that. And so they encouraged me to try. And so I did, and I switched majors, and I made it, But I had a late start, a very late start. I didn't start taking voice lessons until I was almost 22. So for me, it was a late start. Well, okay. A singer has to learn to use their brain differently than what they're used to. It's not a cerebral process when you're actually singing. It is a cerebral process when you're learning all the things that you're eventually going to have to integrate into your singing. The languages and the thousands and thousands of details that you have to learn to do. And the skill you need to execute those details. And that takes time. And that does take a brain. I would not be surprised if someone said that the average IQ of a singer was 130. I would not be surprised at all. Because it takes at least that much. I'm talking about the people at the top, to know all the things that they need to do in order to be a singer. But the actual act of singing itself is not a cerebral process. And that's what makes it tricky and makes the skill to be an opera singer so difficult to find, because that's more of an athletic mindset. So not only do you have to have a cerebral to start with things, but when you're actually singing, you're actually using your sensory motor cortex, which is a totally different way of using the brain. And then you have to integrate all these things into that. And so you're literally retraining your brain. And very few people can do it at that level. Very few people can do it. And that's why it's hard to find singers that are really good at what they do, because not many can do it. Oh, there are so many skills. You have no idea. They have to have a good ear for sounds and linguistics. They have to learn how to communicate in a different language, which is totally different. Like, for example, in Italian, when you want to emphasize something, you lengthen the note, whereas in English, you make it louder. Those kinds of things. And so people, when they're learning how to express in a different language, sometimes it feels like their expressiveness has been taken away from them, because their impulse is to do it the way they're used to, and then they have to learn how to do it in an entirely different way where it communicates. They have to learn how to communicate in an absolute music kind of way. If they were just singing without words, could they communicate it in their phrasing? They have to learn how to express words theatrically. They have to have basic acting skills. They have to at least resemble the part they're singing to a certain degree. You don't have to be a perfect fit, but you've got to have, you have to be believable enough that people are going to suspend their belief if they see you singing. If you got to have something to compensate if the eye doesn't match the ear, and so you got to be really, really good if you want to do that. But I would say you have to have the ability to integrate two different kinds of thinking. The ability to perceive a sound two different ways, because there's the sound that the audience hears, that you want the audience to hear, and then there's the sound that you have to do to make it sound like that. So you got one ear that's listening to what it really is. You got to have the sound of what you got to do in order to make it sound the way it really is. And that's a complicated process that a lot of singers can't get past. So there are many, 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 many things. And then there's just the practical things like how to sing with a prompter. Sometimes a prompter is more a pain in the butt than not. Sometimes they can be very helpful, but how do you do it when someone is always ahead of you and you're hearing them? That takes coordination. How can a singer survive it if the stage director is saying, turn your back to the audience and sing to the singer, and the conductor saying, look at me. Okay, how does a singer make that work? Okay, that takes social skills. The ability to keep a tempo, the ability to go from one tempo to the next. Musicality. Musicality is a big, important ability. And of course, there's ability and then there's skill. So there's your basic, for example, you have to be musical, but then you have to have musicianship, which is the schooling of that musicality, which is an entirely different thing. You have to have a good ear for language, but then you have to know what those sounds are. So you have to have natural ability and you have to have skill. And you have to know how to get along with big egos. Because there's a lot of very nice people in business, but there's a lot of big egos too. And you have to learn how to, negotiate and get along and somehow, not be compromised in what you're doing. That the quality of what you do is not compromised. So that's a skill. Miguel Lerin asked me to participate, and that's how it began. He asked me to be a judge, and then he asked me to work with some of the young singers, and that's how that began. I think a competition like this is very important. It brings people together. At the very least, the singer gets experience singing under pressure. At the most, they get an award. They get recognized. And so these competitions are terribly important. People hear them, and especially with the economy being so weird and the world being so weird right now and strange and difficult. I think these kinds of things are even more important because they hold society together. I think that great singers will always emerge no matter what. I don't think there's ever been a lot of great singers. There's been a lot of good singers, but not a lot of great singers. Great singers are always a few a generation. They're great in different ways, of course, but I don't think there's always been a lot of them anywhere. They just, over the years, they collect because you have this from this generation and that from that generation. Then you hear them all at once and you say, oh, well, it used to be a lot more, but they span 4 or 5 generations. So you have to keep that in mind. I've discovered in my program that there are good voice teachers, and there's more than people realize. It's just that they're isolated and scattered. And when you bring them together, they're grateful to be around others of their own kind, in a sense. And things start to happen when you bring people like that together. And I found that most really good voice teachers are not competitive. Find a good voice teacher first. A lot of singers make the mistake of going to a conservatory and thinking that they're going to get a good voice teacher. And usually there's only 1 or 2, if they're lucky, in any conservatory. And so what happens is they go to the school and they might get the bottom of the bucket. They might get the worst teacher there. And so what we advise our singers is take a year off and before you go to school and audition your teachers and find out who you connect with and find out who you work best with and where you make the most progress, and then go where that teacher is. It really doesn't matter where you go to school, but it does matter that you get the right teacher and that you get the kind of training that you need. And if you happen to have, like, you might be missing one element, you don't have to not go to that school because that one element is missing. You just supplement what's missing. Like, maybe you're in a school that's got a great voice teacher and you've got lots of opportunities to perform, but they don't have any coaches, or they only have one coach and they pound notes. It's like, okay, that means you have to pay for a coach. Okay, or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you got great coaching and great performing opportunities, but you don't have a good voice teacher. Well, then you have to supplement it with a good voice teacher. And when you do that, there are ways around it. And things like music theory, I mean, you can get that anywhere. You don't have to go to a fancy school to get music history and music theory. So I say go where the teacher is, and then you do well. And so most of our singers take our advice and they do that. I mean, a lot of them come, they already have good voice teachers. And of course, we don't want to mess with that, because if you've got a good voice teacher, you don't want to change it. We never say, oh, I think you should stop studying with this teacher. We don't do it that way. Usually, if they have what it takes, they come, if they have that ability to sense that they're not in good hands, they come to us and they say, how do I find a good voice teacher? And then we help them. So that's how we do it.